This is Justice Worriers, a podcast where we think about things that are right and wrong in our world and how Christian ideas can help us respond to them. We prefer hard questions over easy answers, and we'd love you to join us in our ramblings. Listen in and contact us using the links in the show notes.
Hello and welcome to Justice Worriers episode 42. My name's Andy and as usual I'm joined by Leah. Say hi, Leah.
Hi there.
And Jörg. Say hi, Jörg. Oh no, I'm sorry.
Hello.
And we're very excited to have with us today Steve and Claire. Say hi, Steve.
Hello.
And Claire.
Hello.
And as you know, listener, we've been talking about church, which hopefully we'll get back to a bit more. Thinking about the questions we started out with about what's church for. But today it's really an excuse for us to talk to you, Steve and Claire, hear a bit of your story. So I think I want to start with you, Steve. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to here?
Okay, so I went to a Church of England school. My mother was a Christian, and we went to a church in Sunbury, Church of England, St Mary's, for those who are interested. And I was baptised, and I was confirmed as a young man. My friends were Christians. Some of them, I had a small Christian circle. I went to a group called Covenanters. I had a friend who was actually now a bishop. Matthew Parker was a friend of mine. We were in various bands together. And then I went to university, which was then called Manchester Polytechnic, to study art. Mm-hmm. And it all fell to pieces after about 2 years. Mm-hmm. I started to struggle with some of the larger questions about judgment and some quite weighty things which I couldn't resolve in my head. And also I started to feel guilty about who I was and how I decided that being a Christian was something which made me feel unhappy compared to not being a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And
join the club.
So in the third year at Manchester, I abandoned my faith, and I sort of lived the life of an agnostic for 20 I don't know, from I guess 1987 up to I met Claire in 2018. 16. No, it's not when I became a Christian. Yeah. So I abandoned my faith. And
was it better? Were you happier?
Oh, that's a good question, Andy. It was very different. I think I look back sometimes, and although I read quite widely about the things which troubled me, I never found resolutions in it. Was it better? I don't know. I'm looking at living a very different kind of life. I was a very different person then. I don't know. I can't say it wasn't. I can't say it was. Mm-hmm. I had a lot of growing up to do, I think. So fast forward, I think I was then got married at about 30 and had a son. Had a rather difficult marriage, but an extraordinary son who is now 25. And then the marriage broke down. Quite, a lot of marriages do. I had a was quite talking to Claire about today. I think I described my lifestyle as quite hedonistic for about 5 or 6 years. And then I met Claire, and I met her church. And I actually get quite emotional when I talk about Claire's church, because and only on one occasion after all the time I met Claire was in she'll talk about her church earlier, but it was quite a radical church. And I entered into their world very slowly, because I was a little bit of a secret initially. And I entered into... No, true, I was.
We're going to hear more about that in a minute.
I was a secret.
Okay.
I was a bit of a secret, wasn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, we'll wait for the next instalment of that.
And I was not a Christian. Claire was in a very committed church, very committed to her church, and I was just welcomed and loved. I mean, you talk about welcoming. I mean, Claire's church family were just amazing, and I saw a difference. I saw people living life differently, and they had different values to me, and I was a little bit. I've always been blown away by Claire, but I saw her church family, and I went up to. There was a point where Claire and I had to decide what we were going to do with our relationship after a couple of years, and I'd asked Claire to come and live with me because down here, because I thought I might lose her if I don't make some sort of commitment to her. Or to each other, really. And I went up to Bugbrook. Was it Bugbrook? Near Bugbrook, anyway. And they were saying they had this agape dinner, and they were saying goodbye to Claire as a group. It was also Claire's birthday. Which birthday was it?
Can't remember.
It was one of your birthdays, wasn't it? Yeah. So they were saying goodbye to Claire, and I remember they gathered round her. I had this, the classic prayer huddle, and I'd have a little speech, and there'd been various little things that said, but there was this prayer huddle, and I wasn't included. I wasn't on the outside. I'd never seen a prayer huddle, let alone been involved with one. And I was looking at them, and I thought, oh, this is amazing. So I was a little bit blown away by that, and I was quite moved by the love they showed for Claire, and for me as someone who was taking Claire actually away from their community.
And the welcome that you experienced from them, was there any judgment in it, or was
none?
They just absolutely?
No, not to me. Not to me. I mean, I gather not everyone was impressed, but all I knew was love from them. I think they were incredible people. So Claire came down to live with me in Egham, and Claire said, "Oh, I need to go and find church." And I saw it come down here, but I do need to worship. I do need to be part of church. So Claire then went off with my I've got a twin brother, and he's a Christian. She went off with him on once.
That's really weird.
Not weird. But eventually we went, that's church over there, the big spire thing popping up. Let's go to that one, because that's over there. So we could see that one. So we Claire went initially to St. John's to see what it was like, and there's a story involving her first ever trip to St. John's. I then started going, I thought, well, I can't not go with Claire to church. It would be wrong of me, to invite her all this way down and say, right, you want to do your church, you carry on. I'm not going to support you in this. You do it on your own. So I felt some sort of obligation to go with Claire to church. And this is before Esther's time. And I started to enjoy it. And I remember there was a curate called Jenny.
Jen.
Jen. And she called us up for communion. And I remember that I'd been through years of sitting on my hands when it was time to go, because my mum's Christian, so I used to go to church with my mum, and it'd be like time for the blessing or communion, and I would like go, yeah, I'm not doing that. I used to do that, same I used to do, but I'm not that person anymore. So I never used to go. This time I felt I wanted to go. So I went up and received the blessing. And I think something changed in my heart at that moment. And over a period of probably about a month after that, I started to think very carefully about my relationship with God. I read quite widely again about things which... So actually, Claire said some of it was a bit wild, but she wasn't entirely impressed with some of my literature. But I revisited things, and although I couldn't totally understand everything which had troubled me previously in the late mid-80s, I didn't feel at the same time I had to find resolution to everything. And I came back. And I rededicated my life to God, and did I prayed that I would have a new start. And that was, when was that? 2018.
Yeah.
Spring 2018. And then we came to church, and the rest is, I say the rest is history, but I guess not everyone knows. We started getting involved with the art scene as church. I started to play the piano in church. Went to Alpha, got baptised in church. Then Esther said, "Well, you're baptised, you should get married." So we we actually we were thinking about it was something, it wasn't, we were very close to pushing plan, going ahead with that. So we got married in 2020. And then the last instalment is I lost my job, which I've been in for 35 years in a local manufacturing company. I lost it because the company folded, was liquidated, and I was offered a job in the church office. So now I work with Claire, and I'm like a professional Christian.
Two questions. One, very straightforward and factual. Tell us a bit more about your art beyond playing the piano. And the second one, you kind of pointed to that contrast yourself, but it would be interesting to hear a bit more about it. It seems like your faith fell apart about intellectual queries, and it came back together on relationship queries.
Yes, that's true.
Where are the intellectual queries now?
Okay, right. Let's do, what's the first one, Jörg?
Art. What else you do in art? Yeah.
Right. Claire, keep this brief. I'll go on too long. It's nudged me. I love talking about painting. Painting is... I started painting again. I've always painted. I did a degree in art, Manchester Polytechnic in the 80s. It was the one thing I could do at school, which I felt I wasn't a complete failure at. Unfortunately, there was, when I got married, I stopped painting, and I started again when I moved into Egham. I started painting some quite large murals, and that was 2015. And I've almost been painting ever since. It's almost like a compulsion with me. It is something which I believe makes more sense as a Christian than when I wasn't. I can't explain why that is. Some people talk about it being a prayer. Some people talk about it being meditation. Some about there's a creative side to it. But for me I need to paint for me to feel happy, to be, and it's a place I go very comfortably, and it is a place of struggle. It is a place of joy. It's a place where sometimes I know I get things right and I'm very, very pleased with myself. Other times, I enjoy the journey and I make mistakes. And I've been painting now for 6 months, and I've made more mistakes than I've ever made in paintings in my life. But it's an immense privilege to do art.
So, is there any sense of an audience in it, or is the audience you? You're painting? It sounds out of something that's deep inside.
Very much so.
Are you looking for people to admire it or to like it, or is that just kind of incidental bonus?
I think there will always be an element if you're an artist that you want people to like what you do. I think there's always an element to that. But the driving force is not people's appreciation. The driving force is it's something like in me that I've got to get out. And I don't think I'm anywhere near producing the art I was meant to produce. I feel that when my time here is finished, I want to say I produced the best paintings I could do. And I want to look back and go, yeah, I'm pleased with those. That was good. I haven't left any stone unturned. I have used my abilities to paint, which, I'm talking about God-given, but I've always been able to paint, and it's something, art has always come easy to me. Although, as I say, it is a big struggle at times. But I think I paint as much for myself as for anyone else.
So it's a great privilege in a way. That might sound weird, but like so often everything I do is defined by what other people think. So to have that inner drive is something I would really like. I think it's an amazing thing.
Oh, it is, and it is one of those things. I get up and I feel that I totally understand people who say I can't motivate myself. I do understand that, but there's one of my little laws or theories on life is that although I'm actually quite compelled to paint and draw, the reason I do it every day almost is that I have everything out. And as soon as I have that I want to paint, there is something there for me to paint. If I had to find my pencils and brushes and things and go and try I probably wouldn't.
Yeah,
but you have to.
Makes a huge difference.
Have the inspiration, and then if there is more than one gap to stop you painting, you probably won't do it.
Yeah.
And whether that's music or any other creative thing, it has to be no barriers between you wanting to do it and doing it. You have to keep that relationship very, very tight and fresh. Right, so that was painting.
That was the first question. And the second question.
No, I'm sorry, I like painting. The second one, intellectually, there was one. Nicky Gumbel said on an Alpha course, and I think this is a bit of a get out, to be honest. That theology or faith questions are like a crossword, and you haven't got to have all the answers from day one. And I still believe that. So there are things I don't understand, and weirdly there are things which I might struggle with, and then have some sort of resolution and come back to and go, I'm still struggling with that. But I think there's a large part of me that now gone, I don't mind anymore. I don't have to resolve things. I don't have this, it doesn't hurt me. It doesn't, it's not something that pulls at me every day to resolve things I don't understand. And
which theology doesn't anyway. I mean, it's more like writing the crossword. You play with words and put them together in a different sequence or a different pattern each time, but you don't actually, there's no right way to have crossword, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I do. Yeah. So, I think my belief that God is ultimately loving and has our best interests at heart, and I don't have to understand his processes and his story for me to have a relationship with him. I don't have to do that. I don't have to read extensive. I'm If you ask me now to outline all my theological woes and problems,
that's what Jörg was asking you to do.
Well, that would be on brand for this podcast anyway.
I would honestly, I would struggle. I really would. I think I would struggle to do that. No, I think it's.
Well, I was mainly interested in the fact that the resolution to your intellectual struggles was actually the relationship aspect of church, not the answers you got from the pulpit or whatever. And I think that's a really interesting journey.
It is. I think I do believe in the relationships, both within church and with God, are fundamentally what's keeping me and pushing me, as a Christian. And it's not the resolution to questions, which largely do remain unanswered, but they're not as, they don't keep me awake as night like they used to.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but for me, I think when I was young, I thought I was smart enough to figure stuff out, and as I got through my life and found more and more stuff that didn't make sense, suddenly the stuff about Christianity that didn't make sense just fitted into that wider whole better.
No, it's so true.
I think we're all of a fairly similar generation, and there was very much a thing around at the time as we were growing up that it was apologetics. It was all about you forget all this postmodern rubbish. Everything isn't relative. It's all provable and decipherable and explainable. And the Christian Union I went to at university, they got trained in apologetics and how to have all these arguments. So I think Christianity at that point sort of set itself up to fail, because it set out this thing that yes, you can rationally explain everything, and I think actually the whole lie of the land has changed as well as we've all grown up. I think. Why
then are sermons so often an intellectual journey, my own included? It still is very much built around communicating a truth out of a scripture verse.
Sometimes, not always.
Not always, but it's harder to make that emotional connection. How do you communicate community in a sermon when you're one person speaking up there and everybody's listening?
Well, we've accidentally strayed onto church.
Oh. Sorry to lead us on topic.
Justified for wearing the badge, they're the chosen ones. Justify those that died, they're the chosen whites.
Right. So I'm dying to turn to you, Claire. So would you tell us a little bit of your story, which can mean anything you like it to mean?
Can you pick a period of my life? Oh gosh. Okay. I've gone from being a Catholic, a Taoist, to a Pentecostalist, to an Anglican.
Right.
Yes, it's very, very difficult to know where to start, Andy.
So let's start at the beginning then.
Okay. Oh, okay. So, born in 1970 in Northern Ireland, child of the Troubles. When I was growing up, I wanted to be in the IRA and be a nun. And I sort of feel to some degree I've kind of accomplished a bit of that in my life. I haven't been in the IRA, just caveat that. And then a bit like, I think was like Steve, I got into my teens and I moved away from faith simply because I just saw hypocrisy everywhere. I saw my own family life with parents who were more interested in presenting a nice, neat, external thing rather than deal with some of the dysfunction that was going on in my own family. Mm-hmm. And I think, so I moved away, and then I went to university, studied politics, because it was my easiest option. I think I didn't want to grow up, so university was a good option for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I probably would have continued if I'd have received the funding, because it was just this lovely intellectual bubble that I could have just happily kind of suffocated in, I think. Mm-hmm. But I went on to live in Holland for 10 years. And it's funny how you come to realizations about things. And I went to Holland to escape, I think, mm-hmm. to escape the troubles that in the early 90s were becoming quite bad again. And I just escaped for 10 years and just took lots of drugs and had a really amazing time. I'm not going to say, oh no, it was horrific. Well, it was until I had a bit of a breakdown, a bit of psychosis. But I think it was escaping from the trauma. Mm. I think, I'd say a lot of people in Northern Ireland have got PTSD. And also through my teens, there was a bit of a flip in the parent-child relationship in my family. My dad had died, and I've more often found myself in the position of parent, rather than child. So I think also when I escaped to Holland, it was to recover some of those years where I just needed to grow up and be a child. So that was amazing. It wasn't really amazing. It was a bit of a head mess by the end. But thankfully, I discovered that I think I just sort of found the strength in myself to think I need to do something differently now. I need to get away from this. I was also in a very dysfunctional relationship, and I thought I need to get away from this as well. So, I left there after 10 years. But just before I left there, I had found faith in a way that, I had quite a dramatic conversion. In terms of, I'd lived in Holland. I'd lived with this guy who had been a Christian, and he had gone back to England to kind of connect with his old church, because we had decided, like, this relationship is toxic. We need to just break away. But after 10 years, and when most of it has been drug fueled, that kind of disengagement can be quite messy, because you have kind of built these connections and forged this life together. And so he had started coming back, and every time he came back from his little jaunt to England, he just seemed a little bit different. And it started really making me angry, because he'd just come back, and there was just something about, he was just a bit more peaceful. He wasn't as abusive. And I remember after about the third time that he did this, I was cycling to work one morning, and Holland's flat. And in March, when those crosswinds are going across those bulb fields, you feel it. And I was just battling with the wind one morning. And I just got off my bike, just threw it to the side of the road and just burst out crying and went, God, if you're real, I know I shouldn't put you to the test, but I don't bloody care. If you're real, you prove to me you care about me and you want to do something in my life, because I'm sick of this. So, picked up my bike, got back on it, went to work, and there you go. So then,
So the wind didn't stop or anything? Not that.
No,
just checking.
No, there's nothing like that.
Suddenly coming from the back.
And so, one of these times, my partner had said to me, "Look, why don't you just come back with me for a weekend and just see what it's like, come and see where I'm going to be living." And I thought, okay, I'm just going to go back and make sure that he's not joining a really dodgy church. So anyway, I went back, and that weekend, a bit like Steve, my first experience of this church was just kindness. Kindness, really. I think kindness is a currency we're not really into trading in anymore, and people were very kind, and they were quite gentle with me. And I thought, I quite like this. But then I felt really disarmed, and then I went into my shell, and then I burst out crying and gave my life to Jesus. So, but it was a bit more, it was like an intellectual exercise for me, and then a couple of days later, I was in London, I was in the British Museum, and I call it my Wesleyan experience, because when it happened to me, and I rang somebody about 2 hours later, I said, it feels like God has put a hot water bottle around my heart. So it wasn't my heart was strangely warmed, like Wesley, but it just felt like God had put a hot water bottle around my heart.
What gallery?
It's the British Museum.
Yeah, but like what were you looking at? Like,
so I was looking at these big like stone monument things.
Yeah, the Babylonian, Assyrian stuff.
Yeah, and I was just, it was like God had put a hot water bottle around my heart, and it stayed that way for about 4 months, and so I come back to Holland again, and we were in the process of packing up, and then all of a sudden it was like, crap, we're both Christians now. What do we do? What do we do with this dysfunctional 10-year relationship? And, and so, we decided we'd give it a go. But this church that we'd gone to was, it was a Christian community, and it was inspired by Acts 2 and Acts 4. It was inspired by a common purse. It was inspired by coming together, sharing your possessions. And I thought, I want to do this. Because I think for me, I was brought up a socialist, and my father was very involved in the trade union movement, and was a real labour man, And so we'd all had, we were all brought up in this sort of dysfunctional society where we saw a lot of injustice, but as working class, we saw a lot of social injustice and economic injustice. So all of a sudden I came to this church where my political ideas and my theological ideas aligned. And it was like, blimey heck, this is flipping amazing, This is all I ever kind of dreamed of in terms of kind of working out my faith. So, I stayed there for about 15 years, I lived in 2 of these houses. One house I lived with 20 people, mums, dads, kids, celibates, grannies, and it was amazing. And I felt, for the first time, I really found out who I was. Mm-hmm. It's like, all of a sudden, life made sense to me, really made sense to me in a way. It never made sense in my own family, in any of my relationships. It didn't make sense at university. But in this way of life, it completely made sense. Mm-hmm. And I remember listening to something you had said in Justice Worriers a few months back. Is something you'd said, Andy, about, how Acts 2 and 4 happened, and then the next thing you have Ananias and Sapphira. And I thought, but it hasn't stopped people from 2,000 odd years trying to find community, to be inspired by that lifestyle of coming together, of sharing to meet people's needs. And believe me, it wasn't perfect. It was not perfect. Like, it was, if you were a fairly strong character, you did all right. If you were a lot more vulnerable, you know, some people were fine, but some people got really damaged in it. And having to, so in a way I found myself, I suspect many others lost themselves. And you've always got this tension between the community, and the individual being as precious. And I think the individual sort of lost out in our community a bit. I flourished, you know, it was great for me, until...
So where an individual could assert themselves, is that kind of what you're saying, that then you did okay?
Yeah, I think if somebody had a gob, like I
can't imagine how you did that.
I think gentler people, you know, if you were fortunate enough to be with the right group of people, you were okay, you were fine. And I'm not saying that like lots and lots of people just ended up trashed. But I think sometimes when you have that sense of community, the individual can get lost. I guess we see it in political systems around the world, haven't we, over the last kind of 70, 80 years.
Can I ask just a bit of context? Just say how many people were in the church you joined?
That lived in community.
That lived in community in the entire church?
Probably about 600.
Wow. That's huge.
Yeah. And I think in the early 60s, when there was a move of the Holy Spirit in this area, people sold their homes and lay it at the apostles' feet, you know, and then when the church closed up about 10, 15 years ago, they sort of got that money back, you know, of their, yeah, they sold their homes and they bought these massive, massive houses where people could come and live together. And I think also because it had very strong kind of outreach to the poor, it also meant that, you know, if we found this person who was homeless, we could, you know, take them back to the house with us, you know, give them food, give them a bed. Sometimes, yeah, that was a bit interesting, you know, because I don't think sometimes, you know, you kind of get up the next morning and you'd walk into the kitchen and you go, oh, who's that? Okay. Oh, you know, he was homeless last night, so we brought him home. But we could do that, you know, when you're pulling all your resources together. It was amazing what we could do.
And what about the other side that you sometimes find in these communities, and where, I'll say, for example, things like purity culture, or sort of kind of making sure, you know, there's church discipline or something like that.
Yeah.
Did you encounter that? I mean, Steve being your secret, for example, you know,
yeah.
into some of that.
Well, as you can imagine, I encountered it quite a bit. Because I would often just get angry about things, or I'd just go off and do stupid things. Like I remember like it was like a teetotal community, and I remember one night, no, it wasn't one night, it was one day actually. I had 3 bottles of wine and started drinking it about 10 o'clock in the morning. It was about a year after I joined the community. So people came home from work that day, and I was sitting on the kitchen floor with lots of potato and carrot peelings around me. I was absolutely plastered. Why I did it, I can't actually remember now, but things like that, I was treated with a lot of grace.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I really was, surprisingly. But then other things would happen, like, for example, I did get into a relationship with a Norwegian chap, and I was very deceitful about it. Mm-hmm. So yes, there was that kind of Matthew 18 element where you'd be sitting in front of someone and you'd have to confess. Mm-hmm. It wasn't really like a panel, it was always... so there was that element to it, yes.
What's the Matthew 18 thing?
If you sin and, if you kind of confess it, then it's sort of dealt with. Right. But if you continue to do it, then you're brought in front of the church that kind of thing. So there was that hardness to it. Mm. But at the same time, there was amazing displays of grace when you thought you didn't deserve it, So I don't regret it. Mm-hmm. I think it's one of the best things I've ever done in my life. Yeah. And, I still have amazing friendships, deep friendships, because I lived with some of these people for years. Mm-hmm. So it was like family. Yeah.
And where's the Taoism in that story? So you teased that earlier. I just wanted to know.
So, yeah, in my 20s, I think I never... spirituality, I think, has always been something, and I think I went on a bit of a journey where I thought I need to figure out my spirituality for my life, because I think there is something out there. I'm not quite sure what it was. This was after I'd kind of walked away from Catholicism. So, I started reading a lot. I started going to Tai Chi classes. I started kind of practicing Qigong. And then I had a really scary experience one time when I was doing a Taoist meditation. And I had this real weird experience where I kind of felt this build-up of energy. And it just completely freaked me out. And I thought, I'm not doing this again. It was really, really scary. And that was that. I thought, right, I'm not doing that again. Because I don't know what this is, and this is, I just thought it was some kind of flaky, just lovely, airy, philosophy. But yeah, that scared me. So that was that.
Can I ask you a question? Your family, not church family, they didn't always get on with you when you were in the church. That was an area of some friction sometimes.
Yeah, when I moved into community, I was offered money by my family to move out of it again. Quite a substantial amount of money.
They thought you'd gone rogue in the sect or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think to some degree they were right. I couldn't see that at the time. I had just felt for the first time in my life that I was like I was on a straight path. And I think when you come from a dysfunctional society, and then you have a dysfunctional decade of drug taking, then you find something like this, and it looks like complete dysfunction and madness to people who really care about you, but it really made sense to me. And even though they hated it, do I think I was blindsided or... No. I don't regret it.
So, but you did leave before... This wasn't the church that you were in when you met Steve?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
It was?
Yes.
So you were there all the way up to...
Yeah. So I was there from 2002 until 2018. And then I think... Steve was my first husband. I got married at 50 because I never had met anybody that I deemed worth marrying. And so Steve. But I do think I felt a bit lonely, and, that there was slim pickings in the church, I'll be honest. And I did go online, and Steve was quite charming, and so we met up, and then after about a year of living the life I lived, but actually really liking Steve, I had to come to a decision. But I think when I went into the community at 32, I was like, this is for life. Don't want to live any other way. But I think by the time I got to about 45, I think things were starting to change in me, and I probably went on a journey for about 2 years and just struggled with these. I can cope with lots of things coexisting in me that don't make sense. But for those 2 years, those things, it was just such a massive struggle, to kind of figure out, what I wanted. And I thought, am I just am I having a midlife crisis? I hate that saying. I think it's such a misnomer. It's a horrible saying.
It's usually 2/3 through your life anyway.
No, it's true. But it was me sitting down and just figuring out what I wanted. And was this enough for me?
Now, the fact that this was a Pentecostal community, and of course, experience with the Holy Spirit also requires sort of a letting go, being inhabited by another force in a way, which can be amazing and can be abusive in the same way if it's not channeled in the right way, keeping promising new revivals, whatever, or spiritual discernment that may sometimes be quite human things. So what role did all of that play in that church for you? Like was it more the community, the sort of socialist living together, the utopian society Acts 2, or was there an element of that? No, actually, there's a spiritual side that binds us together, that if we didn't have this, if we didn't pray in tongues together, if we didn't have those prophecies, it wouldn't work.
Yes, I would definitely agree. There was a massive spiritual element to it. Massive for me. I think we loved worshipping together. We loved using the spiritual gifts. I think... And it was, I think, kind of using those gifts. It was such a joy. That was the thing. There was such a joy to how we lived our lives. I think my Catholic upbringing, strangely enough, grounded me a little, because sometimes, you would have a meeting, you'd be speaking in tongues, and somebody's praying out and you couldn't hear a word they said because everybody was literally screaming in tongues like they were at some kind of pop concert. But I think I always felt, sometimes it was a bit disorderly for me. And felt like it was unboundaried, and it was almost like the Spirit's telling us to do this, and people would just go, "Oh, okay." And I was like, "No, surely we've got to test this. Tells us to test the spirits, So sometimes it was amazing. Like, you'd have times where somebody would bring a word, and people would just be on their knees, and there'd be repentance, and for me that was the most beautiful part of it. But like I say, I think during my time in community, I probably became more Catholic in some strange way, because I've always been interested in the Catholic mystics. And so I think I just find myself, like you heard of the Bruderhof? the Bruderhof community, German community back in the...
Oh, Bruderhof, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry.
I couldn't do that book. Yeah, and I think, like, I look at them and I think, like, it ended up, community was almost more important to them than God was. And I think I was always really mindful of that in our community, that, like, it had to be God first, the community second.
Well, in the sense that the community was only possible because the Spirit was speaking all the time and feeding sort of these things, right? So, like, that Holy Spirit experience very much would have been seen as a ground of the community, or not?
I would say probably at the start, but not so much near the end.
Right. So it became more performative, that side of things.
I think it did. It became more target focused, and it was things like that I really struggled with in the end, because I think I'm quite a simple soul, and I think I take things and I hold on to them, and they're the things that make sense in my life. And even within community, I think little things I used to live by is a Francis de Sales quote. And he just says, keep your life simple, go about quietly, just loving God and loving your neighbour. Don't get distracted by, the things that, in the long term just don't matter. And I tried to live like that in community, where, because I'm a massive overthinker and I can really get in my head. And before I know it, I'm sort of in the pit. And I was thinking, how the heck did I end up here? But it's just the kind of spiraling of my thoughts. And
Welcome to this podcast.
Yeah. I think as well, I think because I probably have suffered from PTSD, my thinking can be very often catastrophic about the most minor of things, and so I think in community I thought you just got to keep this simple. Just love God, love people, don't get distracted, just love God and love people, and just try your best. That's enough. I mean, if you spend your whole life doing that, job's good.
So, the big question for me that comes out of that story is, you've lived in this uncompromising situation where you get to be simple, as in everything's pointed in the same direction. How do you cope with being a capitalist again in a sort of normal situation when you tasted that purity?
I think I just keep doing what I do. We live very simply. I think I don't know how to live any other way. We had a situation a few months ago where one morning Stephen made some coffee, and he's very good. He always brings me coffee in bed. And he came upstairs and he said, "Claire, I think we need more furniture because our house was looking like a Franciscan monastery. It's so ascetic." And I think we make a choice to live quite simply. It's not particularly difficult for either of us, I don't think. And I think that the same principles still apply, and I think in a way at times I look back at that period and I think, well, was I just living in a bubble, or is it now where my faith is really becoming authenticated? Right. It kind of, when believe me, it's not easy living with people you don't like. And I remember some folk, I remember these raging arguments because I keep short accounts with people. So I generally ended up in a lot of arguments. Because people are people, they just wind you up and you wind them up. But I think because we had that space to work relationships through, you ended up being friends with the most bizarre people, but like deep friendships, not these crappy shallow friendships, because you couldn't escape one another. It was like family, and I think like when I moved down here to be with Steve, the first thing I did was go and see a counsellor, because I pretty much had a breakdown, because all of a sudden I was taken out of an environment where I had these rich, deep relationships, and I had nothing. Well, I had Steve. But like Steve, there's no way Steve was going to compensate for what I just walked away from.
Yeah.
I guess I was going to ask a question which you've just slightly answered, but what are the things from that style of church that you would like to be able to bring forward into the situation you're in now? And do you think any of it can be transported across, or it was such a unique place and experience that you can't replicate a bit without replicating the whole?
No, I think relationships are relationships. And I think that you choose to put into relationships what you choose to put into them, I think that we were really keen on iron sharpens iron as brother sharpens brother. Now, sometimes for people I really trusted and loved, I would let them wound me because I trusted the heart towards me. Some people I just kind of, they just kind of go for you, and you just be like, right, okay. And I think regardless, I think what Christ's idea for the church was, regardless of how you live your life, that, we have to be genuine in our relationships with one another. And we have to be courageous and I think it gets harder and harder living in the kind of world we live in, where, we live in such a divisive world now, that it's almost like I feel, right, game on. We've got to go for this and be more like Jesus. Because who else is going to be?
Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes that means engaging with those people who you don't agree with, right? Because it's, in our version of church at St. John's, lovely as it is, all the relationships are different for you guys because you're working in the church, so you're kind of in a little mini community there. But for those of us who attend church rather than work for it, all the relationships are on our terms. If we don't want to speak to someone at church because they've wound us up, they're easy to avoid, or if we want to have deep relationships with people and spend a lot of time with people, we can choose to do that. If we want to keep it superficial, we can say hi to people and give them a smile and ask them how they are, and then head off. So I guess I'm just thinking through in my head what you're saying about you have to work it out with people when you're in that community, because you are there together. Whereas in our setup, they annoy me. I'll sit on the other side of church, and I won't necessarily have to deal with them.
The boundaries are fuzzier too than in a community like this, right? So people float in and out, and you might show up, you might not show up, and it's not, people might say something, but it's not going to be like, we're going to pray for you, you haven't been here for 2 weeks. So it seems like the community is wider, but also less defined in a way.
What do you mean, less defined?
Well, if you're living in
St. John's.
it's St. John's.
Oh,
Compared to that sort of tightly knit community, it seems like here you have people who only come to the community fridge or who only come to the Sunday service and don't engage with any of the other things. And so it's like just much more versatile and again, like,
it's on your terms, right?
It's on your terms, and there's people I haven't seen in years, and I know they've probably moved on, and they're still in Egham or whatever. But there's not, people come and go, as it were.
I think for me, because in a way, I think as well, coming from a family of 6 where my parents pretty much had an open door policy. So there was a lot of people in our house at all times because of my elder brothers and sisters. I've always had that sort of sense of community. And I guess as well, coming from being a Catholic from Northern Ireland, where our communities are very, very sharply defined in terms of the area you live in, the school you go to. We've had all that as well. So I think for me, I don't know any other way to do church really apart from throwing myself in and doing community. And so even though it's a very, very different environment for me, I think my philosophy is in my head and in my heart, I've got to just continue doing it the same way.
What do you think we could do at St John's to create more of that community? I mean, question to both of you, really. From having, not been at the church for years and years and years, is there stuff you see that you think we could do differently? Or
I think things like what you did to us, you extended the hand of friendship by offering us a meal, like saying, come round to my house for a meal. I mean, I don't think you'd even spoken to us. You didn't know us, you didn't know what we were like. I mean, that's
the kind interesting.
I have my resting face on, and it just looks really moody. She needs a bit of cheering up. But I think it is little things like that, that can make a difference. It's somebody being courageous, taking that step. It's about connection, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So both of you mentioned kindness, and I wanted to ask you, Steve, about can you think of specific, when you said you felt kindness, what actually were people doing? I'm trying to think how we can apply this.
Oh, when I got to know Claire's church.
Yeah.
It was a little bit passive. I think for me it was not to have to put in the centre of an agenda. I think I'd understood what to be a Christian meant intellectually, so I understood that. I didn't need it explained to me by somebody coming up to me at the end of a service and having a little talk. I didn't need that. It only happened once. I think what I needed to do was to feel accepted. I think this is a slight tangent here, but I also believe that seeing some extraordinarily genuine people being genuine, and genuine meaning that they had the kind of infectious personalities is one way of putting it, but everyone was different, and everyone had this genuine nature to them, and I found that quite attractive. So what I'm saying is, instead of necessarily sort of like invitations, teas and biscuits, and the kind of the traditional tick box things we would do in church, I think if we can learn to be authentic with each other, I think that goes a long way, and that doesn't necessarily mean there was a hog roast, and a lot of people came to the beer bash, the hog roast for the men's ministry. I thought that was a very good example.
Yeah, this was recently at St John's.
Yeah, it was maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago. It was very well received, and people I think were very, 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 very good, and we opened it up to a wider male community, because it was a male only event, and that kind of activity, and it was I think it was fantastic, and seeing Christians see each other as we are. We're not pretending to be something we're not. We're not trying to be extra special. We're not trying to be sort of super welcoming or super kind, because that's not always how we feel. But to be genuine, open, honest.
I'm really interested in you describing all this, because the community that I'm imagining was probably very concerned about whether you were just about to go to hell, and actually did have a big agenda, probably.
Yeah,
but then maybe
yeah.
So how did they come across as being genuine and not having an agenda when maybe they did really?
I've got no idea.
Yeah.
I don't know. No, I've got no idea how they did that. I couldn't tell you. Maybe they trusted Claire's judgment, or they saw there was a bigger picture going on.
Is it not the case? I mean, I have a Pentecostal background as well. Is it not the case that you do trust a little bit that God has a plan here? I mean, this is sort of a theology that I find harder nowadays because of everything we see going on in the world. But the idea, okay, this person just came in here, and God's got a plan for them.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah,
it's not going to be my doing necessarily. I'll just do what I can to reach out, to tell them about Jesus, whatever. But it's not up to me. The Holy Spirit will do what they want to do with them. Is that what you found there, or am I sort of projecting?
Strangely enough, the thing that really got me whenever I first, my first visit to the community, and somebody prayed with me, and there's a Dutch guy, and he said to me, "Claire, do you know you're a sinner?" Now, as someone who knew the, I think, terrible amount of shame, terrible amounts of shame, even into, like, when I found the community, you know, it's another story. It took me about 4 or 5 years to actually really, really understand and hear that God loved me. You know, it wasn't God was putting up with me because he made me and he had no choice. And it also, the whole filter of, you know, seeing God through my dad's eyes and thinking, well, God must be like that because my dad's this and all that crap. It's just messy and just really harms you. Sorry, I completely lost my train of thought. This happens a lot these days.
it was about the sense of
that it was more confrontational than what I said.
Right.
They did confront you with this idea of being a sinner and all of that.
Yes.
You found that healing somehow.
Yeah, but that was the really weird thing. So I'd had all this shame and I kind of, you know, lived with it into my early 30s. And then when that guy said that to me, I had this moment of realization that I was, but actually it was okay. You know, it wasn't some great big, oh my goodness, I'm a sinner. It was like, yeah. And I sort of understood it. It wasn't, it was like a heart realization that I was separate from God. That's what it was. It wasn't you do all these really stupid, bad things. But it was, I'm separate from God here. And it was, and that's not where I want to be now.
That's really interesting because my first thought when you said that was, this takes me to a really toxic thing that I was taught, which is essentially you're worse than the worst, and God hates you, and I'm aware that there's this other side to that where, understanding that you're a sinner can be like a freedom. I'm still can't get away from the sense that it just crushed me, still crushes me. But it's helpful to understand from you that can be that same worldview can be a much healthier thing than what I'm hearing.
But that also means not every community is right for everyone. Like you said, you know, like there were people who got hurt by that.
Yeah.
That reinforces a sort of particular message about yourself.
Yeah.
Then it's not the right place for you to be.
Yeah. I can say I don't ever feel condemnation, and I haven't for about 20 years now. No, probably not that, about 15 years. And that's an amazing place to get to. And it's, I used to really beat myself up at times, you know, new terrible shame. But yeah.
I think this feeling that our lives were, the sin was something which I'm sure we can all relate to, particularly when I was younger, just to feel that there was these acts you used to do or thoughts you had as a young man, and all these things separated you from God, and you couldn't, this was the source. Your sin was the source of your separation and your dysfunction, and it's your fault. All this, I believe now, and having gone through that and having remembered that, there are times where we'll go, okay, this is the sort of thing that used to separate me. This is the sort of thing that stopped me reading the Bible. It's the sort of thing that stopped me praying. This is the sort of thing that sort of moved me away. But it doesn't have to. I'm the book, the Ragamuffin Gospel book. It explains that you are enough, and we are enough, and we don't have to be amazing Christians to be accepted by God and to be receiving of grace. We don't have to be that kind of person. So I think that on some level, I think I've that's come to be a realization for me that whatever I bring to the table, weirdly, it's enough in some incredible way.
Yeah, you said earlier about you talked about the love of God. I think it was when you were talking about whether the intellectual questions had gone away or not, and it sounds so obvious, but to me, the thing that seems to unite us, with even when we have completely different ideas about a lot of stuff, is that there might be a God, and if there is, then God is a nice person. And if we can somehow keep focusing on that and understanding that for ourselves, then everything else flows from it. It's a little bit obvious.
There's also something that it just in my brain listening to the stories, and I was going back to your questions, Andy. I mean, they're also quite different life journeys. Mm-hmm. You and I haven't made a radical break from church for 20 odd years and lived that life sort of, in a very different way and then come back. So maybe it is also a different journey for every one of us to understand what that means and to wrestle with the manifest absence of God, not just with the presence. So all those questions that piles up for your life, the complications it throws out. And maybe that also then means there's different answers, that coming back to the old answers can be very helpful in healing, coming back to community. Whereas, when you are listening or hearing them continuously, they just keep plucking on that old string. So I wonder, it's just different journeys as well.
I think that's a very valid point, for sure. Yeah.
And that's kind of why we're here.
What? Well, I don't want to land anywhere.
It did strike me that we were by doing this podcast, we're trying to be open and share a bit more of ourselves in some of the ways that maybe you were describing.
I think if Claire and I, there was a takeaway from Claire and I, that our story so far is that God can work with some extraordinary situations. I mean, the way our relationship started, the different positions, different places we
Really
were both
not good.
in. There was.
It really wasn't.
It was far from textbook. I mean,
Yeah.
I say it was the opposite of textbook. You know, nobody
There was
would,
no book.
There was no book. There was, yeah. It was. Yeah, if you had gone to said to anyone, "Well, this is where we are," and all my friends said, "Don't go near Claire. Don't touch her with a barge pole.
She's a Christian.
She's going to be crazy. She's not going to be good news for you." And yet, you know, and how things. I just look back at my life, our story, how we came together at Spirits and John's. It's just crazy. I don't understand it. Can't work out how I ended up here on this podcast with Claire married. I mean, it's St John's, part of the church. I know it doesn't make any sense to me at all. It's crazy, and yet somehow God can work with crazy.
Yeah, and I think that I really want that to feed into our conversation about church, that we need to start expecting to see God working outside of church, outside of Christians. You know, like the idea that God isn't there in some part of life doesn't really make sense when you think about who God is.
Like we had a crazy situation a few months back in the middle of the summer. This lady came into the office in her late 20s and said, "I don't know anything about God. Tell me about God."
It's a bit of a responsibility.
Okay. Right. How do we do this? Anyway, we just talked to her, prayed with her. She's doing the Alpha course now, you know, but it was her bravery. And I mean, I'm a crap evangelist, you know, and that was the one thing I used to get condemned about, you know, the evangelists in our church would say, "Right, we're going to London tonight and we're going to talk to people." And I just shrink, you know, because I'm just so
cringe,
just wary of strangers and just that sort of cold calling of, "Let me tell you about Jesus," you know. So that girl that came in, that was my perfect. All right, okay, sit down, let's have a chat.
We didn't have to pitch the product, you know, if somebody's asking you about it, rather than sort of kind of artificial, here's an answer to a problem you didn't have.
But even just things like that really renews your own faith, because there's people out there. And, you know, like she says, "I've been walking past here for weeks and weeks and I've just wanted to come in and speak to someone, but I've been scared." And I thought, this is amazing, you know, and it's little things like that. I just think, you know, God's still on the move.
Right.
He wants to work in people's hearts.
Yeah, and you know, yesterday I was at the Playtime, the playgroup that we have at St John's. It's been running for 30 years now, so that's like 30 years worth of volunteers showing up week after week, getting toys out, making cups of tea for parents and carers, welcoming them, loving them, chatting to them. And so they had this amazing celebration yesterday. And I reckon there were fully 200 people came through the doors during that day. And you know, okay, we live in a fairly middle class bit of Surrey, but there was an enormous diversity of people came through that door.
Yeah.
People from every kind of, you know, diversity of ethnicity, from different socioeconomic backgrounds. They came in, and they came in because they have experienced that welcome and that love and that care, and, you know, somebody to put up with their children for a while, which, you know, is much needed. And that's, you know, that's 30 years, and that is evangelism. That is going out, and that is spreading the good news about Jesus, because that is, even if people aren't directly told this is what the gospel is, it's demonstrated it in a consistent way for all these years. And, you know, it was a fantastic event. And, that's that's what church should be. Well, is doing.
Well, the fact that the church is there, right? So that you can, that is a place you walk by and you think like, what is this thing? You know, and the same with playbooks. You know, like there's a surface that people can attach their questions to, and sometimes that's enough. Yeah.
And there's times like I do scrutinise the Bible, and there's that one scripture that Paul says, like, is it Apollos waters and somebody sows the seed and somebody does this, and I like I said, I'm a fairly simple soul, so I just think to myself, like, if I just do my little bit and do it well and as best as I can, like, if God wants me to do other things, if he wants me to go out and be an evangelist, oh God, please no. But, I would be up for that. But at the same time, I just think deal with a human being in front of you as kindly and as lovingly as you can, which is very hard for someone like me because I'm suspicious of strangers. I think growing up in a society, when somebody knocked on your door, you weren't sure if they were a friend or they were there with a gun. Yeah. So there's always a ambivalence towards people I don't know. Once you know me, I'm fine. You've got me forever, but it's that. It's sort of, I don't know you. You scare me. I'm always trying to have to break those barriers down, which is really hard.
But yeah, that idea of playing your part and just letting the rest, that's interesting because it kind of goes back to the thing Jörg mentioned of a kind of idea of God's got a plan and everything, and then you start questioning, well, how can God have a plan when all this stuff's happening? But maybe there's another version of that as well, which is a sort of it's still true that all we can do is what we can do. All we can do is do our best. And then there's a sort of unfolding of the world that happens. Maybe we're not so confident that God is directing everything, but it's still the case that we can just do what we can do.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. There's a sort of fortitude as surplus or something that you can identify with the Spirit in the sense that often the world is good. It doesn't just lead to bad. When people get together, good stuff comes out.
Amazing stuff can come out.
Yeah,
not even just good, amazing stuff.
Especially when we're brave enough to be open with each other, which is really hard.
It is.
Cool. Thank you so much, Steve and Claire. It's been amazing to hear a tiny little bit of what I'm sure there's a lot more to. And for all thoughts about church, which we will come together and talk more about. So thank you very much, listener. Thank you, Jörg, Leah, Steve. See you next time.
You've been listening to Justice Warriors. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also follow us on social media by searching for Justice Warriors, where warrior is spelt like someone who worries about things. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating, since that helps other people find us. Also, please tell your friends about us in real life. We'd love to hear from you. To get in touch, use the email address in the show notes or contact us via the social media links. Thanks for listening.
They told you, now you do what they told you.